The Nadgee Solo that I have in front of me has been taken from a mould that we acquired 18 months ago. This boat has a very long and illustrious history in Australian sea kayaking, and although it has a formidable reputation and has achieved an awful lot in the hands of very skilled paddlers like Stuart Truman and Jason Beechcroft, Dave Winkworth, who was the designer, there's not a lot actually written down about it that describes it in any way. So we thought today we'd give you a bit of a description of the Nadgee, just basically walking you through the boat as we see it in front of us here. Before I do that, my connection with the Nadgee goes back quite a long while. I bought my Nadgee in 2002 and I paddled it extensively for about four to 5 years before we changed direction a little bit with our paddling. But it took me lots of places and made me feel very comfortable along the way. I paddled across Bass Strait for the first time, paddled Cooktown to Torres Strait, and finished at the seaport of Sacia, which was a trip of over 1,000 kilometres. So had to pretty much remain self-sufficient, carrying what I needed in one of these. So I have some very fond memories of my time in the Nadgee. Looked after me well, took me places that I would have never dreamt of going before I took up kayaking. So let's have a little look at the Nadgee and a little bit of a think about, or a bit of a talk about what it's all about. First in production in the late 1990s and designed and built by Dave Winkworth on the south coast after extensive testing. I was one of many people fortunate enough to actually paddle Dave's famous plug boat, which just got heavier and heavier as it got more and more bog put on it and more finessing done to the shape. Certainly the boat had an interesting heritage in that it wasn't actually inspired by traditional kayaks. It wasn't actually inspired by Greenland style kayaks. It was inspired by a design at the time which was considered quite cutting edge and almost futuristic by its designer, Cam Bros in Seattle. And I think Dave heard about this boat, saw images of it, and also heard about its performance and decided it was a really good starting point for the sort of boat that he would like to paddle. At the time, at 57 centimetres wide, it was considered on the narrow side of what most sea kayaks at the time were, and 5.2 metres long was probably a little bit on the short and sporty side. The conventional wisdom at that stage, when I started kayaking indeed, was that sea kayaks had to be at least 60 centimetres wide, or actually 2 feet in the old measurements, and around about 18 to 19 feet were good sizes, so that's 5.5 to 5.8 metres long. So this was shorter and narrower, a real sporty machine at the time. Subsequently, of course, beams have got narrower and boats' shapes have changed dramatically. But when we look at this, make no mistake, in its time and when it was first invented, this particular shape, this particular idea of designing a kayak was not actually very traditional at all. Now, you do have a hard chine through here, well-defined V through the centre of the boat. The widest point of the boat is aft of centre. This is a Swede form boat, quite a drastically Swede form boat. When you look along the centre line here, you'll see that there's a massive keel line and a fixed skeg that runs all the way to the stern. This is a boat that will almost always have some engagement with the water through this centre line because of the depth and definition of the keel. This was an idea that was first pioneered by Mariner, but certainly one that Dave took and adapted to local conditions and made this extremely formidable design. This isn't a fairly slab-sided boat in the traditional hard chine mould. This is in fact something quite different. You'll also notice that this is concave through here. This isn't actually a straight plank. This is actually quite deeply hollow through this section, and that hollow disappears down the side of the keel towards the stern. As we move forward from the stern towards the midsection of the hull, you'll notice that the chine continues. The concavity disappears, and you end up with quite a traditional flat plank shape through here. And then, in a way that is very, very atypical of a traditional kayak, whilst the V continues through the middle, the chine disappears completely, a long way from the bow of the boat. Unlike many boats designed at this time, and certainly many hard chine boats which were relying on the way that all of the planks would resolve towards the bow of the boat, this is a very full shape and quite atypical for the time that it was designed, where there was a great belief that a very fine entry was a desirable feature in a kayak. Moving right down to the other end of the boat, you can see just how fine the stern section of the boat is. Extremely fine, and originally, during some of the prototypes, quite deep as well. The boat's been cut away at the stern to allow it to release just a little bit when it's put on edge. But don't expect that you're going to get the stern to skate around as you would with a traditional British style boat. There's just too much keel here to let that happen. Depending on your taste in kayak design and performance, you might see the fact that the stern of the boat not skating around is a bad thing. But bear in mind that when this boat was built, one of the options that a lot of people happily used was the boat without either a skeg or a rudder. And its ability to track at all quarters to the wind predictably made it a very appealing boat for long distance travel. Of course, both the designer and anybody who chooses a boat wish for that boat to be a package that's greater than the sum of its parts. And I think in this way, in this particular case, the Nagi actually performs very well. The Nagi stern certainly tracks very predictably, and the boat won't easily be pushed offline. The midsection of the boat provides an enormous amount of heeling stability to complement that strong tracking stability. The fullness through the bow of the boat stops the boat from diving, plunging unpredictably and following seas. It provides a dry ride into a headwind, and it also gives you a surprising amount of volume forward of the cockpit. Again, for a boat of that era, where most of them were extremely fine, you know, the sorts of bow bags that you'd need for something like a Nordcap almost came to a point, whereas here you've got plenty of volume all the way through. So that gives you some idea of how the boat harmonised those features in order to produce a boat with a particular performance set, which was extremely appealing to long-distance expeditioners. Consistent with the original design of the boat, all of the deck fittings are actually recessed in and made in the mould. This gives the boat a very streamlined look. A lot of people particularly like this way of setting the deck lines into the mould. Also consistent with the original design, there's no bungee laid out on the foredeck. Dave's opinion and those of his predecessors in manufacturing the boat was that this was an area that would be customised by the owner. And there's a number of different ways this can be customised with aftermarket fittings. You'll notice over the years that the compass recess on this boat has had to be made bigger and deeper as compass options have changed. But this one here fits a Ritchie kayaker compass very neatly. The boat also evolved based on market trends and international market pressure to include a oval hatch on the foredeck. The original Nagi that I owned had a very small valley hatch on the foredeck, the argument being if it wouldn't fit through one of those, you shouldn't take it with you. But of course these days people need more whiskey and wine, and they have to have a bigger hatch to carry it. You'll notice that the current version of the Nadgee Solo also has a very small glove box hatch just forward of the cockpit. Basically just another response to increasing market pressure to have lots and lots more little features to store bits and pieces. Also on the current Nadgee Solo, again to meet the market, substantial cockpit opening, very comfortable to get in and out of. As spray deck technology got better and better, the need to have a tiny little cockpit became less and less critical. And as people wanted a more comfortable seating position, this also became a feature that was sought after. Still has good thigh bracing, and we've kept with the original Nadgee foam seat. The Nadgee foam seat fitted onto Velcro in the bottom of the boat, has been a feature of the boat right from the very first one that was built, and we still have these manufactured by the very original builder, Dave Winkworth, and people find these seats extremely comfortable. One of the nice things about them is that you can sand them out to get a shape that fits you as comfortably as possible. What we have changed a little bit though is we've gone to a Snapdragon backband on a rigid plastic band here. We like the robust, durable nature of these and the way they can be positioned in a wide number of spots in and out of the boat. Another interesting and quite unique feature of the Nadgee is the offset back hatch. The idea behind the offset back hatch was that by putting some bungees through these attachment points here, you're able to attach your spare paddle without it sitting over your back oval hatch. When we purchased the mould of this particular Nadgee model, there was a deep slot in the back deck. And this was for a rudder which was designed to fit into the slot so it could be protected. Many of the original rudders made for this boat were made out of timber or a flat blade of aluminium, and were extremely vulnerable to being damaged when landing and launching through the surf. It was also a design which meant that because of where the rudder pivoted from, the blade had to be very long. There was a lot of extra work went into actually making this rudder work. There's even a remnant in the mould of our deck which actually used to house a whole lot of running gear for lifting and lowering and locking the old rudder into place. This all seems rather ironic considering that many of us, when we first bought our Nadgees, didn't actually realise that they needed a rudder at all and paddled thousands of kilometres without having any sort of a rudder. But suddenly this rudder became a massive focus of attention. When we actually started to look closely at what was involved in engineering this rudder, we spoke to people with mixed opinions as to whether they were reliable or not, looked at many of the engineering challenges. We suspected that maybe we had the solution under our noses the whole time in a rudder which we'd tested extensively and used for long trips in a number of different situations. And this was the Smart Track rudder. To add weight to our decision to use this rudder on the design, we were also able to take advantage of the number of trips done overseas in extremely harsh environments, heavy surf and all sorts of difficult situations, which had also relied on using Smart Track rudders with little or no problem. Ultimately, field serviceability, durability and just plain functionality won the day for us, and we honestly believe that this is a big improvement in terms of a serviceable, simple and effective rudder. Some people are concerned when the rudder's in this position here that they're not getting very much blade in the water. But when you look at how deep the pivot point on the rudder is, you'll find that it's actually as long, if not longer, than many of the rudders that slotted into the back deck in terms of the area of draft that the rudder is working in. The other nice thing about these is that these blades are able to be replaced in the field without any complex tools. They're very easy to get hold of. If you leave on a long trip with one of these taped under the deck, if you ever need it, you'll know where to get it. That said, being a Nadgee, if you need to get home without it, it's probably the easiest boat to do that in terms of tracking. Of course, at the other end of the rudder blade is the system that operates that blade, that moves that blade around. In this case, we've used the Bigfoot system. It's the system that's in all our other boats. It's also a standalone system that we sell separate. And what we've realised over the years is that the rudder at that end is only as good as the system that delivers the instructions to the rudder, that actually makes the rudder work. by keeping it as uncluttered and simple in terms of that transmission line between those race spec cords at that end and your foot pedal at this end, you get the best possible response from your rudder. Not only that, it gives you a nice strong anchor point in order to lock your feet against. So we've stuck with the Bigfoot. Very happy to be able to offer that as a standard in this boat. Personally, over my years of paddling the Nagi, I found it was a very reassuring boat, very comfortable boat, regardless of conditions, and a boat that I was always happy I was sitting in when it came to a difficult surf landing. One area that it seemed to really shine. Times have changed. We've moved on in terms of some of the boats we personally enjoy paddling. In order to try and get the boats that we really wanted to paddle, we ended up having to design them ourselves. You can see some of them up there on the wall, or one of them up there on the wall. So why did we decide to invest in the Nagi? And who did we think this boat was really for? Well, we believe there's still a market for the Nagi. It just depends on what you're after. And if you're still after a boat that will look after you when it's really rough, will feel very comfortable and predictable in just about all quarters and in just about all conditions, depending on your experience. If those are the things you're most after, a boat that gives you a relaxed ride and a predictable ride, then the Nagi is definitely worth a look. When I was speaking to Dave about it, Dave Winkworth, the designer, he certainly concurred with me about this. He agreed. He said, yes, this is really a boat where your tracking, your stability, your ability to carry some gear, get in and out through the surf, are all very well catered for. And I tend to agree with him on that. So there'll be a group of people who will always find a boat like the Nagi to be very appealing and a very, very handy boat for all conditions, both fully laden and as an empty day tripper. So there you have it. The Nagi, made in Australia by Peter McDonald, Charger Surfcraft in Victoria, a very successful and respected builder of surf skis and all manner of paddlecraft over decades. This boat's made by the infusion moulded process, and it's an extremely strong boat for its weight. By having such an inherently strong shape, we've been able to get the weight on these into the low 20s. There are 2 layups available, and we believe both of them are extremely suitable for all sorts of action on the sea. If you would like to give this a try, here's our Nagi demo, just waiting for you to jump in and take it for a spin. This boat gets lots of sea miles over the course of a week because so many people want to give it a try. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to check out our whole range of products at www.expeditionkayaks.com.